Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. News-wise, CCP has actually been pushing out quite a few updates in short order for EVE Online in the last few weeks and months, and some of those updates were big updates to the Abyss, including a tier 0 and a tier 6, which ought to be interesting. We also have the new cores for the structures that have been deployed, not necessarily needed across the board, so you can wait with that investment if you want to, but they're available on a TQ, and a new update is planned for next week, which I'm very excited for, rebalancing the Edencom ships and reducing the loyalty point cost for the skill books normally by 90%. That is definitely very good news for those that have been just mesmerized by the 2 billion ISK price point for some of these skill books. So hopefully that will crash the prices down very quickly, and I'm actually curious as to the impact on the market already. So we'll take a look at that as the extra product this week. Next up, I think we can take a quick look at the New Eden store here to see what's happening over here. Alright, so we don't see this very often, but I'm not doing a search for anything. Nope, it's the Zento Isideko skin, a combined skin that's front and center. Kinda like it, especially when there's a decent amount of black on the ship as well. But nothing on sale, nothing bundled front and center. It's just the New Eden store with that skin showing up as the first one. And then down here we've got some Ruby Sungrazer skins. Ooh, for Galente ships, that actually looks very nice as well. And then down here for Amar Oasis of Faith, alright, kind of like that one too. So just some very nice skins. Oh, this I don't really like that much. Metamateria Exotica skins for some of the Striglavian ships, but yeah, Edencom ships available as well. Oh, this is of course very nice number of skins for Edencom ships and for Triglavian ships as well. And then down here we still have the Blue Star Defender skins marked as new with the first bundle that we encounter all the way down here. So yeah, nothing very special to report in the store this week, so we can move on straight to the market. As always, we will start with some plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 245. Like that. Quick check that everything is alright with the recording. Looks like it should be. Let's get started here with plex. You can see 2,750,000 ISK in Jita itself and 2.6 million for the buyers. If we move to the Tranquility Trading Tower, 2.72 million, so a very narrow margin here between Jita and the Trading Tower. And the buyers, are they going up? Just a touch as well, right above 2.6 million for the buyers. So that reads to me as more hesitation on the chart. We can clearly see that we're moving sideways basically over the last week, in fact over the last 10 days or so, after a big jump that happened. Well, big, it's relative, but with this high point on a daily average up to 2.8 million, this basically has been absorbed, and the market is now not sure which way to go. The reason for this one was a sale on Omega Time, so you could get Omega Time for fewer plex than you do now, and as a result, demand for plex shot up all of a sudden, very clearly shown in the volumes, but more hesitation at the moment. The multiple pilot training certificate actually able to maintain its gains a little bit better than what plex has done, up well above 1.3 billion on average at the moment, 1.36 billion for the sellers, almost 1.4 in Jita, and then below 1.3 million for the buyers. This does mean that basically no one is selling to these buyers. They're all coming into the sell orders in order to compete, and this creates the average price. That's where the action is. After that, we have the skill extractors that have mirrored the plex chart very, very closely, and is now hesitating above 300 million. So we had a whole summer, basically July and August, below 300 million, very low prices at that point. Now, few gains, but which way to go from here, the market doesn't seem to be sure. 306 million for the sellers, 301 million for the buyers. That is also a very narrow margin, only 5 million margin for something that costs 300 million. That is not a lot, and so right here. I think this just exemplifies how the market is hesitating. Buyers and sellers are just getting closer and closer to each other. No one is willing to say, you know what, nope, we're stopping our buying right here, or sellers are not, hesitating to bring anything to the market. It's just right here at this price range, and that's where we're moving sideways at the moment. Let's take a look at the impact on the injectors next. Here are the large scale injectors that are also plateauing off after basically catching up to the increased price for plex. So you can clearly see here that plex has done the same thing. In July we hit a bottom below 2.5 million, then we've been going up. All of a sudden we have the jump from the sale on Omega time, and then we actually have these gains that have been maintained. And so the large scale injectors right here have actually come late to the party, had a bottom in mid-August, going well below 700 million ISK, and now we're back above that and back on our sideways movement. 705 million for the sellers, 675 for the buyers. Also decently narrow margin for the price range, so it seems to be like we're stalling. Everyone is catching a breath and everything is coming together. Small scale injectors is showing that even better. Again, early to mid-August we have this bottom at less than 140 million ISK. Then we have this increase in price under pressure from plex, and now that sideways movement in the last month or so. 144 million for the sellers, 135 million for the buyers. That's a bigger margin than in the skill extractors, but it is still not a large margin between sellers and buyers for the price. Next up we have the daily alpha injectors then, that are also resurging, basically coming back into the fold of the entire plex stuff category, I would say, because contrary to all the other injectors, this one was actually at a high point, relatively speaking, throughout the summer, went up to 40 million ISK, and actually while all the others started to gain, this one lost some ground, and now at the tail end here we're basically back up a little bit. Could see all of this as part of the hesitation process. Very nice here, 37 million for the first sellers, we're going up to 40 million pretty quickly, and then 35 million for the buyers, also showing that the margin has closed up considerably and that the market doesn't really know where to go from now. A lot of it, in my opinion, is going to depend on CCP's announcements. Do they have some cool announcements for the rest of the year? Is there anything happening with the winter? There's another thing that's happening, of course, that's the war in 0-0 with the end of the summer. Will that bring back a lot of players? Is that an angle that EVE Online can take here for more activity? All of these, in my opinion, are definitely possibilities, but we can also see like many new games coming out, a new expansion for World of Warcraft. If you look at it from that broader perspective, it could be very hard for EVE Online to like reach hype and to increase the amount of players active on the game. That would then also increase the demand for plex and all of this stuff. So it's definitely not a run race or anything like that. We could still go either way, and from that perspective I can understand the hesitation that the market is showing. In my opinion, more activity, more players in the game should bring more demand and higher prices. It should start that part of the cycle, but will it happen? Well, we'll have to keep an eye on that. We finally have the hypercores that are pushing back up above 300,000 ISK, but it is not on higher volumes. I see this as basically a little bit of drying up, or maybe even relisting of some of the cheapest hypercores. A couple just below 300,000 ISK for the sellers, then we're up to 308 very quickly, buyers at 275. Is this slightly more activity in the Hypernet relay? It is possible, but I would then expect volumes to be up here as well. So I'm saying this is perhaps a bit of a drying up at the wrong time. You know, end of the summer, people come back. There's always people that do like to take a small gamble in a system that is relatively fair, the Hypernet relay, right? The odds are always exactly what they are, and so perhaps a combination of those two has caused both the availability to decrease, and thus we have this price response. We'll see what it turns out to be, I think, in the upcoming weeks. Next up, we'll take a look at the minerals coming in at 940. Like that, as always, we'll start with titanium, which is actually doing really well in GTA itself. If we go and take a look at that, sellers 838, but buyers 767. So we definitely have a little bit of a margin opening up here between sellers and buyers, which makes it very interesting to see that 5-day moving average actually going down a little bit at the tail end, showing some pressure and below 8 ISK for the day. That does mean that we're playing on both sides. There's people that are managing to sell at almost 8.4 ISK, but there's also people that buy below 7.7, and that's a pretty wide margin between both of these. The fact that sellers are able to go up like this does show that there is very strong demand at the moment. I think the war must be one of the main players here. Lots of destruction, fleets being flown, lots of hype as well, an enormous amount of propaganda that is being put online. So quite a bit of hype, quite a bit of action happening, and that is just going to continue to increase demand for raw materials so that they can keep making ships and they can keep losing ships. I love all of this, of course. Part of the life cycle in EVE Online. You have a creation side, which I tend to be more towards, right? Make stuff, find stuff, earn stuff, is more my part of the equation. But you also have that very important destruction side of EVE Online, and at the moment, yeah, the war is doing pretty well. The monthly economic numbers ought to be very interesting, and Tritanium is showing quite a bit of demand all of a sudden. 8.4 ISK, definitely one that you can still focus on. This is a great price for Tritanium. Then we've got Pyrite, which, well, last week was looking like it was finally recovering, able to get back above 6 ISK, but we're already showing signs that it's weakening again. 6.3 for the sellers, though 596 for the buyers to get these average prices, and there's still dumping happening to these buyers as well. And what's keeping everything in check is this right here, 6 billion units at 637. You can compete with that a little bit, and you are going to sell this Pyrite probably in decently short order, but to get the price higher, yeah, you need to have a market that absorbs another 6 billion units, and that's not very easy to do, and this explains this hesitation and this downward pressure at the end. After that, we have Mixalon that, well, is doing quite okay in my book. Well above 80 ISK is a very good price as well. A bit of a pressure, but nothing too major. Almost 90 ISK for the sellers. That is pretty damn high. 83, 82 for the buyers, forced up above that 80 ISK mark. That is very substantial, and I think that this is basically cementing that situation for Mixalon at the moment. It is the bottleneck in a lot of industrial areas, mainly nullsec at the moment. 90 ISK is very, very high. 70 ISK is already a great price, and this is substantially above that. So yeah, Mixalon and Tritanium, again, at the moment, definitely something to focus on if you are mining. Then we have Isogen that I thought was stemming the bleeding last week, and is still doing so, is now just basically happy to hover just below 25 ISK on the average price. 24 for the sellers, 24 for the buyers. Ooh, that's a super narrow margin, but again, that we have that same problem here. 3.5 billion units that are in the wait at 2407. You can see that these orders are like 10 days old at this point, and that is just too much. And I think this, for me at least, I mean, I can't be certain of it, but this does indicate that my theory is correct, at least in some respects, that for Isogen and Pyrite, the problem is that we still have really, really big stocks from a year ago that need to find sellers. And players, you know, sometimes you have some of these big sellers that come in, they're saying, all right, 24, above 24 ISK, that's great. If you look at where Isogen comes from, they probably managed to mine that or buy that during the time of 15 ISK prices. So they're just willing to dump that and wait for all of that to be absorbed by the market. And all of that is, of course, keeping us in check and making sure that we can't do what, for instance, Noxium has actually been doing, climbing again. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth spike up. Another 1 year high point, starts at less than 250 ISK and is currently selling for 744 ISK, almost 750 on the sellers, and then we're up to 691 for the buyers. Definitely something that you can start to focus on as well. almost triple the price from the start of the year. And now look at these volumes: 1 million units, 2 million units, 6 million, 8 million units. Compare that to the billions of units of pyrite and isogen, and of course you have this very different price response to basically the resource crunch that CCP was talking about. Will it eventually happen in isogen and pyrite as well? I personally think that CCP is kind of shooting for that, so we just need to be a little bit more patient, and eventually all of this could be worth a lot as well, like isogen and pyrite. So we'll see. It is very interesting to see that those with the volumes that to me feel like it's what a player, a small corporation or something like that brings to the market on the regular, compared to something like 6 billion units, which I think is obviously investors, people that have speculated on these goods. And the price response to that, the potential here is pretty amazing. But of course, that game of cat and mouse just exists all the time. There's probably patient investors as well, ready with pyrite, ready with isogen, to jump at even higher prices. Perhaps if we, for instance, would take isogen at 30 ISK, there's another few billion isogen ready to wait, and at 35 again. But patience does seem to be thin, because in Noxium, to my feeling, right, all of a sudden here you already have some definitely substantially higher volumes. Here all of a sudden as well, on the opportunity to sell at 400 ISK, lots of dumping, and eventually you just run out of those stocks, and then you get that runaway price increase over the last 1 to almost 3 months here to triple the price from the start of the year. So real patience can definitely pay off as well. After that, we have the Zydrine market that's able to maintain its gains well above 1,000 ISK. Very impressive as well, of course. 1,100 for the sellers and 1,000 for the buyers. Feels pretty much like the good old Zydrine is back here. And then we have that mirror image of it. Here is Megasite continuing to struggle back down in price yet another week. Started just above 400 ISK and is now at 470, 455 for the buyers. That is a pretty weak recovery compared to almost every other mineral that we have checked so far. And then finally we've got Morphite, or oddball out, starts the year above 12.5 thousand ISK. And is now starting to play with 10,000 ISK on the average prices. 10,680 for the sellers, 9,090 for the buyers. Honestly, historically speaking, Morphite below 10,000 ISK is a good jumping point. So I would potentially start to invest right now, start to slowly build up some Morphite for trading later down the line. And just look at the potential here. We went up to 20,000 ISK late April. That's very impressive, and you could even read this chart as a 1-year low point. Let's move on to the PI market at 1755, let's say. Like that. All right, let's go over these and let's see if we can spot something of a trend, because that's really what I'm looking for, is a trend break. And here, all right, broadcast notes, very good news in my opinion, to all of a sudden see prices play with 2 million ISK, which is back on a more normal average. 1.93 million for the sellers. There's just a couple of these. Are they recent? Yeah, and then we head towards 2 million decently quickly on the sellers, and almost 1.9 million for the buyers. Definitely a nice recovery from about a month ago, where we reached a 1-year low point at 1.6 million ISK. So that's pretty nice, and at least a sign that there's some increase in demand. Next up here, we've got construction blocks trying to defend 10,000 ISK, but look at these average prices all over the place. Definitely not easy to do. First seller still below 10,000 ISK, 9,500 for the buyers. Yeah, it's hard to say that this is a good chart, although at this point from the 1-year chart, it starts to look like we're right on our average. Keep in mind, I would say that construction blocks can have a higher average price, historically speaking. I think even 11,500 or something like that is possible, perhaps even higher. So to me, this is still not a good price range. Consumer electronics, okay, big volumes that have all of a sudden increased the price well above 10,000 disk. Hopefully we can maintain that, but yeah, it's hard to say. 11,000 for the sellers, 10,000 for the buyers, and just look at the lack of demand still clearly on display right here in the consumer electronics. Normal average price is more like 12,000, 12,500, so this is still clearly struggling. Coolants are slowly trying to get back to 10,000 disks. That's very good news for me because I tend to produce that stuff. 10,000 to 10,160 for the sellers, 9,500 for the buyers. At least we see a slight increase in demand for this one, but clearly we're trading very low. Cryoprotectant solutions. Alright, moving away from that 100,000 disk, I thought if we would go below that, you would start to look into this as an investment. So this mid jump right here is tied to implant sets that CCP has released, and as you probably know at this point, the way I'm looking at this one is potentially we'll get an Edencom related implant line as well, and when that happens, this should be something that you have invested in. But I personally am looking for the best possible deal, so I want to buy my cryoprotectant solutions and some of the other goods here that have that same chart when it is below 100,000 disk. 122 for the sellers, 115 for the buyers, so that is a pretty big no for me at the moment, and quite a surprise recovery in cryoprotectant solutions. Enriched uranium is also definitely climbing out of the hole, but is clearly still trading well below average, getting to 11,000 disk, 11,600 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers, and this is on a bit of a lack of supply that this increased price has happened, so this can unfortunately be squashed very quickly by just getting regular supplies in. So I still don't see this as too good a sign for a general recovery in PI. Integrity response drones tied to advanced PI materials is all of a sudden finding its way above 2 million. That is quite impressive. 2.25 million for the sellers, 2 million for the buyers. That is really important because we are starting to see that's very close to a normal average price for integrity response drones, and we're starting to see some higher competitive prices in these buyers as well. So advanced planetary materials, hopefully they're leading the way, and hopefully, because you need everything below that in order to finally produce advanced PI materials, hopefully they can lead the way to increased demand here as well. But this is the second after broadcast notice that has definitely jumped up again as well, back on a far more normal range with at least some buyers willing to pay the price as well. Mechanical part is also trying to defend 10,000 disk, 10,700 for the sellers, but 9,600 for the buyers. And again, you can't browse very much, so showing that lack of demand still definitely exists. Nanites with the April bump, you know what that means. We're looking for less than 5,000 disk to invest in this one, 6,000 for the buyers, so that's too early. Then we have our nano factories, and that is very interesting. Here is our third advanced PI material tied in a very large respect to the production of structures, and this one is jumping above the start of the year and well above 1 million ISK all of a sudden. 1.3 million for the sellers, 1.1 million for the buyers. Sure, there's not a lot of sellers, that is definitely true, but the buyers are pretty aggressive here, decent volumes as well. 1.1 million. Are there sellers in the Tranquility Trading Tower? Yep, that's actually where some more sellers are hanging out as well, but they're above 1.3 million, so this is very impressive. There is a slight lack of supply to be seen here as well, but we're definitely seeing increased demand for advanced PI materials. I thought after last week, where we clearly had some hesitation and part of the markets probably felt like perhaps they just made it so hard to deploy new structures that we'll see just less usage overall, and thus not necessarily more demand for advanced PI materials. But now it looks to me like the market has clearly decided that more destruction is gonna mean more consumption, and so organic mortar applicators, for instance, slight jump up here again as well, tries to get back to 1 million. Hasn't succeeded just yet, but it's at 1 million for the sellers and 960,000 disk for the buyers. They have closed that gap quite substantially, and it's like just a slight touch below average, but it's getting right back there. Very impressive. Recursive computing model, this one starts at 1.5 million and ends a bit above that. 1.6 million again for the sellers, almost 1.5 million for the buyers. Not that much action here. But yeah, again, it's difficult to say here. You could also say it's a lack of supply, but seeing this across the board in advanced PI materials does make me wonder. And then we've got the bad news for PI. Here is robotics tied to fuels and crashing to another 1 year low point. 82,000 for the first buyer, 75,000 disc for the sellers. That is very cheap. You normally try to look for like 100,000 disc on a normal average price. So this is yeah, definitely another opportunity for the long run, I would say, to grab some super cheap robotics. Self-harmonizing power cores, alright, slowly losing its gains, did go back to 2 million, ISK at 1.9 for the sellers, 1.6 for the buyers. This one is not following suit just yet, does look like substantially less demand here than, or price competition, I should say, in the self-harmonizing power cores. The sterile conduits though confirming the trend, going up to above 1.3 million, yeah, above that for the sellers, and almost 1.2 million for the buyers. There's a little bit of competition. Even if demand is not up necessarily that much in numbers, buyers are aggressive enough to say, I want that, and I'm going up to almost 1.2 million to get my sterile conduits. That's gonna be a worthy investment, which yeah, is showing some signs that they believe the destruction and then consumption side of structures ought to be enough to support more advanced PI materials. Specialized PI material here, we've got Yukomi superconductors, a February spike, so obviously also tied to implant production, and also has that that increased price that we saw in the cryoprotection solutions. So unfortunately, I would say I'd be looking for less than 50k for the investment price range to be sure of a nice return, and it's just not happening. And then finally we have the wetware mainframes that is still slowly gaining above 1.75 million, 1.85 in fact for the sellers and 1.75 for those buyers. So we may slowly head back towards 2 million on this one as well. Very interesting to see that yeah, basically the market switched again from the announcements that CCP did with the new cores for structures. First week we definitely had a bit of a boom all of a sudden because we were so low as well. Massive big volumes, big jumps in prices. But the week after that, I think the market said, hey, hold on a second, perhaps this is also going to just mean players are not going to use structures if they don't have to. That could actually lower consumption and demand. So we had this hesitation, but now almost all of them jumped up again and are back towards their normal average prices. Very interesting. Next up, advanced moon materials coming in at 27.15. Let's go with carbonites first. Crystalline carbonite 1.1. Alright, continuing to climb the hill, going up above 160 ISK, 170 in fact for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. Very impressive, especially because I don't see the volume response right here. So this is nice if you have invested at that bottom price of 125 just a bit over a month ago, you're looking at a pretty good deal already. Then we get 1.2 photonic metamaterials for Galin. No. Oh, should I do it like this? All right, we can maybe try that. I'll give that a try this week. So 1.1 was carbonites, so the very base material, 150 on average for the price for Galente, and then you get 1.2 the corresponding metamaterials. We're actually going to a 1 year low point and are only now pulling back up, I think under pressure from what's happening with crystalline carbonite. 13,300 for the sellers, 13,200 for the buyers, and this I think does create potentially something you could speculate on. If crystalline carbonite can make it to a 1 year high point all of a sudden, why shouldn't the corresponding metamaterials actually jump up to at least average prices or slightly above that? That does mean that this price here has a lot of room to grow as well. Next up, we are going for, god damn it, let's go with titanium carbide 2.1. So the 0.1s are, yeah, okay, are the carbides. Okay, got it. 2.1 Titanium carbide, just continuing its sideways movement below average, a bit above 150, 160 for the sellers, 150 almost for the buyers. And then for 2.2 nonlinear metamaterials are also below average, and this feels far more normal, working their way back above 20,000 disc, 21,000 for the sellers, 19,300 for the buyers. Decently narrow margin here, but this feels like it is in line with each other, below average for Caldari materials, Tech 2 Caldari production. And potentially you could still try to buy this, but very different from Galente. And then we have 3.1 Fernite carbide for Minmatar ships is climbing a second hill. So this is the war spike because of the use of the Munin as a major doctrine in 0.0. Then we actually had an over response in supplies, perhaps investors dumping a little bit too quickly, and we went to 1 year low point below 125, and now we're actually working our way back up substantially. 171 for the sellers, 145 for the buyers, is showing that there is very strong demand here all of a sudden, and we are climbing our way back to a well above average price. Let's take a look at the corresponding metamaterial. Here is plasmonic metamaterial for Minultar apparently. I can't even type correctly, but I think we get the point. And this makes for an interesting picture. 1 year low point hovering at that very low price on this chart, 19,000 for the seller, 16,500 for the buyers. And then if we look at what's happening here with crystalline carbonite and with the 2.1, then I'm looking for 1.2, god damn it. And this turnaround, that is very interesting in my opinion, because these could be set for a turnaround as well. Trying to grab one from the buy orders at this point does make a lot of sense to me personally. And then finally we have for Amar, here is the tungsten carbide chart, a bit like with Caldari, struggling to get back above average and is moving slightly up to sideways below 175, 177 for the sellers, 173 for the buyers, okay, 175 average, and close, super close margin between these two. And then the 4.2 terahertz meta materials, 1 year low point, but not that sign of the recovery just yet, which the Minmatar one does have, with Fernite carbide clearly going back up substantially. So quite a bit of movements, and potentially here in Jita at least, Amar and Minmatar stuff seems to be becoming very expensive. I know some of you guys would love for me to now jump to Amar and see if we get like a different activity over there. Unfortunately, the technology for me personally isn't there just yet, but it's something I'm keeping an eye on, looking at this, what's happening here in advanced moon materials. I do think that we could have different markets taking over the major activity, but there is no certainty yet, so just give it a little bit of time. If that's what it turns out to happen, I will try to incorporate all of that information as well. But for now, we're just making Jita the major trade hub, and we're giving all of that a little bit of time to see what happens. We still have some other advanced moon materials to check. Here is fermionic condensates continuing to be under pressure, back below 80,000, 79 for the sellers, 76 for the buyers, so well below average. Ferrogel is now crashing to a 1 year low point, back down to 33,000 for the sellers and less than 30,000 for the buyers. That is below the entire chart. You could look into that if you want to. Fullerite is also clearly struggling, well below 1,000 disc now. Buyers are in fact at 816, almost 900 for the buyers. That is also very, very cheap. Hypersynaptic fibers back under pressure as well. A bit of a seesaw movement, but the trend on the 20-day moving average is very clear, and we are back towards the 1 year low point as well. Less than 10,000 for the sellers and the buyers, so that is not looking too good. Nanotransistors, another 1 year low point. Let's see where those buyers are at. 4,100 disc. Let's see if we can get 4K right here. That is also really low, and phenolic composites, yet another just a recovery from a 1-year low point on some higher volumes, but I don't think we're gonna go very far here. 1600 for the sellers and 1400 for the buyers. Yeah, that is still just not enough demand. And then finally we get ceramic fibers. We had this one exception in ceramic fibers that made its way back towards 500 disc, but it's very quickly losing ground again, and buyers are already down to 364. That is a pretty massive crash here all of a sudden. So all these gains are being wiped out very quickly. So yeah, it's very difficult to say exactly what's happening in advanced movement materials. I think especially the Tech 2 production stuff, because I do believe that there is this friction now in how do you get the right supplies to the right spot, and is it not a better option to go to a MAR or to go to one of the other trade hubs? I think the market is trying to figure that out, but for all the others across the board, of course, we are lacking demand and we are at super low prices. Lots of investment opportunities if that's the gamble you want to take. Next up, Tech 2 ships, but first I'm gonna drink a little bit. There we go, just some water, and so Tech 2 ships at 34.50. Like that. And so yeah, actually a mixed picture here, right? Galente Minmatar up potentially in production costs, and then Caldari Amar seeming still pretty low, and the Basilisk is still trading well below average, not a super pronounced 1-year low point yet. So 205 million for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. That's pretty nice margin. Investing close to 180 for the Basilisk I think makes sense. And then I think buy orders is empty, so let's go for my holdings as well. No, not one of these. All right, let's move on to the Cerberus chart. Flat again, not breaking through that 200 million on the average price, so there is definitely this ceiling of investors, or this bottom of investors that is being decently aggressive. 230 million for the sellers, 190, almost 191 for the buyers. Yeah, pretty aggressive investing. I know that I've bought this for like 185 and I think even 175 at one point for one of the trades I made in the Cerberus. So this is keeping us from really hitting those low points and those really cheap buy orders. Then we've got the Guardian that is now substantially below 200 million, and this one is trying to get to that low point. I hold the Guardian that I bought for 184, and look at that, 199 million for the sellers, 179 million for the buyers. I would read this as an opportunity to grab a Guardian on the cheap if you don't have it. Look at this entire chart, buying below 180 and then trying to sell for 230, 250, even 300 million. That seems like a pretty good deal to me personally. So this one, in my opinion, is investment ready. It's also very noticeable. This is an Amar ship, and we saw that the Amar production in the advanced movement materials was, you know, really low in price as well. Then we've got the Hound that is already working on its comeback. So I'm holding a Hound that I bought for 22.5 million, including taxes. It's already selling for almost 27 million. Buyers are up to 23.2 million. So here your buy opportunity is probably the best opportunity is over. I think in the last couple of weeks I clearly showed there where you can look at those volumes on the sell orders, which right now, you know, we had like 200 to 300 hounds there all of a sudden. That's when you could have made your purchase the easiest. Now it's going to be difficult to actually grab a hound for 23 million as we are on the upswing. I could sell now for some profits. Honestly, I'd love to see us well above 30 million and really make it a very nice profit from these purchases. Ikitursa next. All right, interesting to see some movement. Unfortunately, it's on the upswing. Hopefully, it's not my video about Ikitursa. It is an amazing ship, very costly though, that has caused this. But we're talking 432 million for the sellers, 408 for the buyers. Definitely a pretty amazing ship with uses. In my opinion, it holds its ground very well in PvE as well. But for PvP, this is potentially like a really high hitting ship, so it's amazing. That's why it's costing so much, and we're starting to see basically that first bit of speculation price movement in a Triglavian Tech 2 ship as well. Then the Ishtar is diving down to a 1-year low point. That could be interesting as well. 208 million for the sellers, less than 200 million for the purchase of an Ishtar. Regular price ought to be above 230 million, so you can see your trade margin being pretty nice as well. We've been here for about a week, so let's take a quick look at that. Yeah, I think you gotta be in it right now if you still want to try to buy an Ishtar below 200 million, because it is drying up. You can clearly see that we're not having that many new sales come in the last 24 hours. The sale volumes are down as well. These 13 is basically your last hope to still snag one close to 200 million ISK, but it's not gonna last very long. I think we're set to have that hound rebound right here as well. After that, we get the Manticore. There's that nice rebound. We went to less than 25 million. We're going back up. Do I hold any? Nope, I didn't have the balls to move on this one. 28 million for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers. Also, you know, in that bounce, but not yet above 30 million, which is where I would love to sell if I had purchased. Then the Munin is flat at a really low price range at the moment. 188 million for the sellers, 153 million for the buyers. I've been saying this over the last couple of weeks, but it still holds true. If you don't have a cheap Munin now and you want that investment just in case of something like this happening, which is just nosec meta, you know, I can't blame you. Definitely try to grab one. Then we have the Nemesis next, that I was just too late for that one, I think. Went to 20 million, so you could have probably bought this for like 19, 18 million ISK, and is now working its way back up nicely. 28 million for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers. Lovely trade to make if you have it. Then we have the Oneros, probably continuing its struggle. Yep, same story as with the Munin. Try to grab one close to 150, and I think it's definitely reasonable. Look at these volumes though, don't purchase like 10 of them or anything like that. Then we have our Panther that I keep in here for production costs. All right, very interesting to me all of a sudden as well. Not just for production costs, but potentially for speculation. We went below 1.1 billion for the average prices, and look at the investor response all of a sudden. We have days where, you know, quite a few of them. Let's take a look at this. 16 trades and 32 of them being bought. That's quite substantial, and here as well we still have 17 trades of them happening all of a sudden. That's more, you know, I can buy on the cheap, so I'm doing this, but this feels a lot more like perhaps some investments in some cheap Panthers. And so we're up to almost 1.2 billion for the sellers. Buyers have been forced up a little bit above 1.1 billion as well, and so I thought we would see this more slow, steady stream of price changes in the Panther that would be in line with potentially production costs. Now, Minmatar has shot up, so perhaps this is why this move was made as well. But yeah, investors are ready on pretty much any level. I think then the Widow Caldari will be a lot more interesting. Purifier, I should be holding those. Yep, 22 million purchase including taxes, 25 million now for the sellers, 24 million for the buyers. There's definitely some expectation for me to go back up, and again, above 30 million would be the dream, of course. Scimitar bouncing from a 1-year low point, but really going nowhere. Purchase, sellers at 180, buyers at 165. Average price should be above 200 million. Very same story as with a lot of these cruisers. Try to grab one at the cheapest price, but don't go crazy with your volumes. And then we've got the Widow, which, yeah, as expected a little bit, looking at what happened to the Panther here, is actually settling at around 1 billion ISK. A bit above that for the sellers and a bit below that for the buyers. And so here we do know from the advanced materials that we have these low prices for Tech 2 materials for Caldari ships. And look at that, we do have some volumes already, so people are taking advantage of these cheap prices. And do we have potentially more buyers or more ships sold than buyers? No, all of these are just one ships purchased, so people are taking advantage of the fact that the Widow is a little bit lower in price all of a sudden, and this is the response from advanced materials being so low. And then we have a jump up in Minmatar production costs, and look at the response here as well. Investors jumping in and people trying to still buy more of them when they can, and now right here at the tail end we're probably going to crash back down in volumes and stay well above 1.1 billion because of that. Interesting stuff in my opinion. Finally, we get the Zealot, and I'm holding a Zealot at 187 million with taxes again. Now selling for 226, so we can definitely see some profits there as well if we want to. And less than 200 million for the buyers. It's a reasonable margin, but of course, compared to my purchase price, it's not so bad. And I was very far from the best one because on some of these, I think you could have bought these for less than 180 at the height of the volumes and the lowest price range. So yeah, there's trades to be made here. I got that one Zealot that I can sell whenever I want. Honestly, I may wait for an even better price, but this just confirms to me that this purchase here below 190 was a good purchase and will make me money whenever I decide to sell it. Let's move on to the Tech Tree ships. I'll keep this open because I'm still holding that Legion and that Loki coming in at 44.15. Let's go like that. And yeah, Confessor moving sideways below 40 million ISK. So we had that spike here that was absorbed like in a matter of days. That was really crazy. 38 million for the sellers, 35 million for the buyers, and these 200 here are going to keep things in check. The new volumes are very reasonable for this price, which feels kind of normal right on the spot. Then the Heggate is working its way back down to less than 40 million ISK as well. 38 for the sellers, 35 for the buyers. We don't have this one big sell order that is basically blocking the price range, but we have more volumes, although the daily increases are starting to slow down, you could say. And this is normal, of course. Look at where we come from. We come from above 50 million, and we've just been, you know, having this industrial response. All right, this is still the best chip to produce. We're making more of them. We're bringing those to the market, and so that is why we have this oversupply. We could overshoot a little bit, but I'm not too confident that that's gonna happen. We'll need to see, for instance, what the Jackdaw is doing when below 40 million is actually jumping up a little bit all of a sudden. Nope, 37 million for the sellers, 34 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours, 4 sell orders still above 100, so we are definitely oversupplying for a price of 40 million ISK. We're going below 40 million across the board here, but all of them are still just, you know, trying to find their range, and the volumes are substantial here. The Jackdaw, is there a reason to still be making so many Jackdaws? No, we've been below 40 million for most of the month, but it is of course still the most popular, in my opinion, or tactical destroyer because of its shield missile combination, its versatility. It's really an amazing ship, so I don't blame anyone to say, if I don't really know what to produce, right? Like the Heggate, a month ago, the Heggate was definitely what you wanted to produce, but if you don't know what to produce, I would definitely try to make Jackdaws, and so a little bit of oversupply there makes sense to me. And then finally we've got this Vapel that is settling at around 35 million ISK, 36.6 for the sellers, 34 million for the buyers, and here you can see that we are starting to dry up, and so all of them will meet each other in that 35 to 40 million range for the sellers. Demand wise, we could see some bottoms drop out, but it doesn't really look like that's happening anytime soon. And yeah, we're still settling basically from this bubble, from the Heggate that's still bringing a reasonable amount of them, and the Jackdaw still seems to be very popular to produce as well. So I'm not seeing anything happening too soon here. All of this feels like we are in the normal market cycle. For the cruisers next, here is the Legion chart continuing to hover in the 130 to 140 million range. 140 for the sellers, 126 million for the buyers, and I'm holding a Legion at 135. So yeah, bought too early, but hopefully we get a spike at some point. Then here's the Loki, back below 150 million ISK, 140 in fact for the sellers, 130 for the buyers. If you want to have a Loki for yourself, definitely make your move now. I would say I bought mine for 150, so way too early as well. But look at this chart, 150 looked like a pretty good time to jump in. Then we have the Proteus chart bouncing from a 1-year high point and low point, excuse me, Jesus, and already going back down. 135 for the sellers, 121 for the buyers. And then finally we've got the Tengu that is also getting back to a 1-year low point all of a sudden. 141 for the sellers and 127 for the buyers. Now, what makes more sense to me here is that we see 230 Tengus for sale and 73 down here. So that's way too much supply. That is definitely keeping the pressure on. Let's take a quick look at the volumes of Proteus. This makes a lot less sense to me, right? We have this bottom dropping out on the buyers. We have this 1-year low point being tested again, and we have no ships, or I mean next to no ships on the markets. Someone with just a few billion ISK can buy this entire market up. So that makes little sense to me. You'd think that the sellers would not be competing this hard, going from 142 million down to 135 million on probably 20 ships. That is crazy. Then we have the Loki. Oh yeah, we're looking at the volumes on this one. A bit more reasonable with 70, but let's keep in mind, I think the Loki is considered by far the best Tech 3 platform at the moment. So to me, this also feels like very few ships for these bottom prices. And then the Legion, yeah, another 64 here. And 15 here, but this doesn't feel like that much supply here either. It's also pretty old, in fact, and the Loki one is not as old as the Legion one. But yeah, I gotta keep warning you guys. I have made that investment in the Legion and the Loki because eventually I'm actually training for the Legion right now. We'll probably switch to Vorton stuff next, but it's so I bought one. I'm ready for my speculative move on the tactical cruisers, strategic cruisers, but don't buy more of these. And it would make sense, in my opinion, if you can buy a Proteus for like 124, below 125 million. Looking at this chart, at some point you're gonna be able to sell with a profit. Same thing with the Tengu. In fact, the Tengu makes most sense to me because it is oversupplied. So try to grab one below 130 million. I think with these supplies you will be able to do that. So that makes a lot of sense to me here as well. I may actually in fact do that because the Tengu is still a ship I want to train for as well at some point. But for the others, Proteus, Loki, Legion, it feels like we don't have enough supply to be in this price range, and so we could be ready for manipulation or anything like that for sure. All right, moving on to the extra product for the week, coming in at 50. All right, 50, that works. Like that. Yeah, I'm curious to see Vorton skillbooks. Let's take a look at that. Skills. Large Vorton projector. Ooh, that is not what I expected. Okay, very interesting. Because if I'm not mistaken, you can grab these from the LP stores. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And CCP announced that these would be going down in LP cost by 90% in the patch next week. And then to see these large Vorton projectors that went down to 250 million. Went up to 1.5 billion ISK again. What could be happening here is that this is one of the skill books that was basically given out as a daily login reward, and that all of a sudden with the update people do want to be ready with that already and want to start their training who didn't get the skill book from the login reward. So you can see that it's basically not being traded. That could be part of what's happening here. Let's take a look at large Vorton specialization. That's more in line with what I was expecting, and this is why I haven't made any videos on the new Edencom ships. 2.5 to almost 3 billion ISK for a skill book to get the Tech 2 weapon system. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but we are seeing that pressure here, so I think people will be dumping as quickly as possible. I'm mostly interested in medium Vorton specialization as well. Still flat at, what's the sell price? Almost 1.8 billion. That's way too much. And small Vorton specialization is flat at almost 900 million ISK right here. Very, very expensive. And in fact, this is some of the crazy stuff here. Higher in price than on the introduction point of the skill books themselves. For here, small Vorton specialization starts at 500 million ISK. People were like, all right, 500 million ISK for a Tech 2 skill book for a small weapon system? That's a crazy price. And turns out that they were actually lowballing it, because people have paid up to 1.5 billion ISK for small Vorton specialization. I'm really hoping that this will become a bit more reasonable and accessible with the introduction of the changes to the LP stores. Hopefully everything will become available there, or is available there. Correct me or let me know in the comments what is the case here. But I'm hoping that this patch will mean that we can start to look forward to some Edencom usage on the channel as well, because I think they're great. I want to test them out for they look great. Not that they are great, honestly, but they're being buffed a little bit, and I want to try them for what I generally do in EVE Online. I want to see what we can do with that unique weapon system, the Vorton projector there as well. So hopefully these prices will become more reasonable. It is what I'm expecting, and that would be another showcase of patience. Can definitely be worth it here, because eventually, I feel like how accessible Triglavian stuff is now, at some point I think that CCP is planning to get Edencom at that same range as well. At least that's my thinking, and so that's why I have been holding off on buying these Vorton skill books. Right now, still crazy expensive. No way that I'm jumping in, but know that for the patch next week, we could see a big crash in these prices. That's it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.